Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where we will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain to get the kind of healthy and loving relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm your host, licensed therapist, Dr. Natalie Jones. Hello, and welcome back to A Date with Darkness podcast. It has been a minute, and I've missed talking with you all. I've not forgotten about you. You've been in the back of my mind, and I have a really special show planned for you guys. And I'm here today with attorney Sam Dordulian, who is an attorney and a victim advocate. And without further ado, let's just get right into it. Hi, Sam. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're quite welcome. So for people out there who don't know you yet, can you tell us about you and what you do and the passion behind your work?
Absolutely. My name is Sam Dordulian. I'm an attorney in California. My focus of my practice is representing survivors of sexual abuse. I've been in that space for probably the last 25 years. I started off as a prosecutor at the LA County District Attorney's Office.
Oh, wow.
I did that for 13 years, and I primarily worked in our sex crimes division. In fact, I was there for almost half my career.
Wow.
I was a senior prosecutor in that division, so I saw pretty much anything in there that you could possibly imagine. Everything from prosecuting cases involving child sexual abuse to adults, and everything in between. After I left the district attorney's office, I started my own practice, and I realized I did have a passion for representing survivors of sexual abuse, particularly if it involved children. That's just kind of like a sweet spot for me. I mean, I just love representing and helping children get over this very traumatic event in their lives. So I started my practice, started focusing on survivors of sexual abuse. And having learned and been prosecuting these type of cases, I started seeing that what survivors really need isn't just an attorney. It's a whole group of people around them. So what I did is I brought in an investigator who I used to work with when he was with LAPD, 20 years doing sex crimes investigations. I brought him on board because he knows how to talk to survivors of sexual abuse. And I found that a lot of times survivors of sexual abuse who go make a police report, sometimes those police officers are not properly trained on how to talk to them, how to deal with them. This detective clearly is.
Yeah.
And so I brought him on board. And I know one of the four components that survivors need are mental health support. So all of my staff in the sex crimes litigation department are trained victim advocates. So they go to school, they get trained, being trauma informed. So it really provides a support group. And it doesn't hurt that my wife is a psychiatric social worker. And she also now assists in giving us all the appropriate resources that we can give out to the survivors of sexual abuse to immediately get them into counseling if that is what they're looking for. So we provide kind of a holistic approach. Of course, I still do the law. I still do the prosecution, civil prosecution now of the cases, but we try to provide a holistic approach to these type of cases.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it sounds like you definitely have a lot of bases covered within your practice. You know, for people that are listening and, you know, they hear about sex crimes and things like that, what do you think is the most shocking thing or the most surprising thing that would surprise just your normal, average, everyday person in terms of sex crimes or what you've seen over the years?
I'll answer that by starting off by pointing out what probably isn't too shocking is that, you know, a lot of people have a great hesitation to come forward and report sexual assault. And all the studies tell us over and over again, there's one study from Germany that showed that child sexual abuse, the average age or the median age where they come out and report it is 51.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the general public, I hear this over and over again. Well, why did they wait 5 years? Why did they wait 20 years?
Yes.
They must be lying. They must be doing this. That is the norm. And just, even though you see it over and over again, we hear it over and over again. We've seen it in all the studies. All the experts tell us this. There's reasons why it's not immediately reported because the general public has this difficulty of accepting when a woman comes forward and complains about it, which is why it wasn't so shocking when, you remember we had that social media viral video that came out where if a woman is in the forest, would they be afraid of a random strange man or a bear? Most women were saying they would be more comfortable with a bear,
Yeah.
and people didn't understand why.
Yeah.
Because if they get mauled by the bear, no one's going to question that they were mauled by the bear. They
Mm.
report that, people are going to believe them. They report a sexual assault by the strange man, people are going to go, well, was that really what happened? Maybe you said yes. Maybe you don't remember. Maybe you were drunk. Maybe something else.
Yeah.
No one questions when a woman reports being robbed. The minute she says she was sexually assaulted, there's some hesitation, there's some doubt. And that
Mhm.
just needs to change. And that's the one fight that I have. And I guess the pet peeve of mine is when I read these comments, when someone comes forward after many years and finally reveals it,
Yeah.
is the people who come in and just say, well, clearly they're lying, this is all a money grab, or whatever else negative comments that they have. That is why most of the women won't come forward, is because the hesitation to accept and believe when they do finally report it. So
Mhm.
that's maybe not the shocking one. I guess the more shocking one that is more of a trend recently that I've seen is child-on-child sexual abuse in schools.
Mhm.
I have seen a trend of that, and I've had so many more cases than I've ever had where you're talking about, 4 or 5 year old children committing sexual assaults on each other. And I'm getting more and more of that. And it's not just, public schools. I see it in the top private schools. And with cases it gets here at Canyon, which is, it's one of the top schools in Los Angeles. I have
Mm.
private schools in Long Beach where you're be talking about 4 or 5 year old children. And that to me has been shocking for me, but I still keep seeing more and more cases like that.
Absolutely. And I would agree with you there. A lot of people are just very shocked by child on child sexual assault. And that might actually be a separate show. But I'm kind of curious, as you talk about victims who hesitate to come forward, I imagine some of the, or at least what I've known from my years in doing this, that some of the pushback starts even too with the police department. Filing a report. When should someone go to them versus coming to see somebody like you, if that makes sense?
In the perfect world, in the
Yes.
ideal world, which unfortunately we don't live in,
Yeah.
but in the ideal world, it would be that, the woman who gets sexually assaulted immediately calls the police, and there's not only a police report, but a full SART examination, which is where they
Hmm.
take them to the hospital and do a full
Yeah.
sexual assault examination and collect evidence. And that's the perfect world. What's funny is when I was a prosecutor, I worked with the top investigators who were from LAPD and the top investigators from the sheriff's department, who were specially trained investigators on how to deal and investigate sexual assault crimes. And when I started my practice, and I would tell some of my clients, okay, go ahead and go report it to your local law enforcement agency, I would get calls back saying, well, number one, they didn't even want to take a report. And you didn't even take a report. I worked with the top people who really understood sexual assault. So now that I'm sending people off to smaller agencies who aren't properly trained, and I'm hearing reports back of people who are turning away sexual assault
Yes.
survivors. There was one story where I had a client come to me. She was a young woman who was sexually abused by her grandfather many years ago. And she went and tried to make a report of that to the local agency that would have had jurisdiction. She called me back and said, well, they refused to take it. They said this is so long ago, it must be a civil matter. And they
Yeah.
wouldn't take a police report. So we sent her back with my investigator, who again was a former LAPD sex crimes detective for over 20 years, and as a victim advocate. And with him there, things completely different. Now,
Yeah.
not only was a police report taken, that report was ultimately sent to the district attorney's office, who ultimately filed charges against the grandfather, who was ultimately convicted. But none of that would have happened if she didn't have support, if she didn't have an advocate, like my investigator who went with her, who knew what to say and knew what to demand of the police officers. And that's unfortunate that we don't have the proper training of the line officers. If you get to the detectives who are trained in dealing with sexual assault cases, great. But most people who go in to make a police report don't immediately get access to the detectives. They get that police officer on the desk, or they get the patrol officer who's called. And that officer oftentimes, especially in the smaller agencies, are not properly trained
Yes.
on assessing it, on taking a proper report, or even on dealing with them and talking to them. I've had clients tell
Absolutely.
me how they were being accused while the police officer was taking the report, and
Yep.
they felt horrible making the report.
Yep.
And that's unfortunate in today's time that we haven't advanced enough where even smaller agencies are
Yes.
not properly training their officers. So to answer your question, which is better, it's kind of a luck of the draw. If you
Yeah.
happen to come across a good police officer who does their job properly, great. But if you don't, my office, for example, we do the victim advocacy. I do send my clients oftentimes with my investigator, again, a former LAPD sex crime detective, who knows what to say and what to do. And, the cops can't get away with just trying to brush you off.
So what you've been talking about thus far is actual physical sexual abuse, but I'm also curious to get your thoughts on something that's newer and emerging, which is the digital sexual abuse through pictures, through video, through sexploitation. I would love to get your thoughts on that and what you've seen there.
Oh, we get a barrage of calls on that as well. It's rampant out there,
Yeah.
especially as technology advances. We're seeing more and more cases where oftentimes women, sometimes men, but oftentimes women will find out later on that pictures were taken of them, intimate images were taken of them, and then later spread across, whether it's to other people or directly uploaded to the internet, some platform. And what I tell people is that it's sad and true that, once it makes it into those platforms, as much as we try to take it down, it's almost nearly impossible to be assured that it's taken down from every site that exists out there.
Mm.
And it's just heartbreaking and heart-wrenching because, obviously it's not something that people ever wanted. It's not something that they ever intended. And now they have to deal with it potentially for the rest of their lives, always wondering, the person that they're talking to at the grocery store, is that person someone who happened to see one of their images? And that's very difficult for people to live with that thought and that concern and anxiety. But it's there, and it happens often a lot more. And it's not the situation where a lot of people think where, you engage in intimate acts and you allow a partner to take a picture. I've had a lot of cases where those pictures were taken secretly.
Yes.
Those pictures were taken after someone was either, plowed with alcohol or some medication. I've even had cases, and I'm a case right now, again, it's related to a school though, where a school friend walked in without my client knowing while she was showering and simply took a picture and spread it all throughout the school.
Wow.
And she did absolutely nothing wrong. She's in her home, taking a shower, and yet now she's subjected to this, incredible embarrassment and anxiety that she has to go face her schoolmates, knowing that this picture was spread all throughout her school, and that's a difficult thing to go through especially for a child.
So I've had this question come to me. Someone sent it via social media. When something like that happens, when someone takes a picture or video and uploads it, who is then liable for damages for that? Is it the site, the person who did it, or is it like whatever site hosted and all of that, or what's the deal?
So, well, let's start off with there's criminal liability potentially
Yes.
as well. So people should consider filing a police report if that was done, especially when it was done without their knowledge or permission.
Yep.
They should consider filing a police report. I'll tell you why that's kind of important, because what I see, unfortunately, is on the civil side, although the person who did it is clearly liable, the person who took the picture, the person who uploaded the picture, if they did it without permission, without consent, they are civilly liable. Here's where it gets very difficult. Unlike criminal cases, where your tax dollars pay for the criminal prosecution, for the investigation, for everything, you don't have to worry about the money aspect of it. On the civil side, it's very difficult to go against an individual. And the reason is it costs so much money to prosecute a civil case. From the time that I file a case to the time I'm standing in front of a jury and arguing, on the average case, especially a sexual assault case, whether it's physical or digital time, I spend anywhere from $100,000 to $150,000 of out-of-pocket
Wow.
costs. That's a
Wow.
lot of money to
Mm-hmm.
prosecute a civil case. And a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
don't appreciate that. So unless the person that you're going after has significant assets, those are just the hard costs. That's not even the time and the attorney's fees that one would expect after
Yes.
prosecuting it for
Yeah.
2-3 years. You can imagine the person would have to have about $500,000 of assets to be able to go
Yeah.
after an individual. And that's what makes it tough. So although there's civil liability, it's very difficult to go after individuals unless they happen to be rich and have a lot of assets or somehow have some form of insurance that most people wouldn't have to cover that kind of conduct. So yes, there's civil liability. It's just going to be very difficult to go after them because you're not going to find many law firms who are willing to put out $150,000 and get nothing back and do it over and over again. They pretty much would run themselves out of business if that was something that they did. That's the difficult part with these cases, is being able to prosecute it civilly. With regard to the platforms, there's a lot of federal rules and regulations and laws that protect them, and it becomes very difficult to go after these platforms. There's a recent push with an attempt to go after certain platforms. It's new, it's novel, it really hasn't been tried, and it's ridiculously expensive now.
Yeah.
There's some hope that maybe we'll overcome it, but there's this federal law that's out there that protects platforms that pretty much say that, like, if you didn't put it up there and you just allowed random individuals to do whatever they want to do, then you don't have the responsibility. You don't have the
Wow.
liability. So that law that was passed a long time ago is now becoming a big hindrance in going after the platforms. As long as they're not actively reviewing and doing anything, they're just allowing platform for people to upload images, they shield themselves from liability. And it's very difficult to go after.
Wow. Is that the same if the photos of you are AI?
Well, it's interesting. Hey, AI is a new problem, and we don't have the laws necessarily to protect the public from these new issues. I'll give you
Interesting.
an example, but what I mean, I have a recent case that came to me. This is a case where a person worked for another individual and discovered that that individual took their social media pictures that they had, regular pictures with clothes on, and altered it and removed the clothing. Now, you would think that that would be some form of violation. Under the civil code in California, as long as if they shared that image, then they would potentially face liability. But if they don't share that image and they just keep it for themselves, and you discover that this person is doing this, the law yet hasn't caught up and doesn't have really a remedy under that scenario. So
Wow.
these issues do present themselves, and I think legislation needs to start trying to keep up with the change in
Yeah.
technology, with this change of AI, which makes it so easy to manipulate regular
Uh-huh.
photos in such a way where, in that scenario with the employee, she was flabbergasted that this person was removing her clothing, and it was all digital and all AI done. But there was really no clear evidence that they were sharing this image. So it made it very difficult to go after this individual. So those are some of the issues that come up with the AI. There is liability if these images are shared without consent. That exists. But if there isn't, they aren't shared and they're just kept for personal use. Right now, that no exact law that kind of covers that scenario.
Wow. You talked about the challenges in reporting sexual abuse or sexual assault to the police, but what are some of the challenges or pushback you've seen as it relates to digital sexual coercion or abuse?
It's even significantly more difficult for people to get the police to take action. Again, it goes to just simply a lack of training and knowledge. There are recent laws that have been passed to try to protect the public with regard to criminal violations
Sure.
with manipulations and sharing intimate images without consent, whether it's digitally manipulated or not. But there hasn't seemed to be the training of the line officers, who are the ones that you deal with when you're a victim and you have to go make a police report. They just don't know that some of these laws even exist. The police officers are unaware of them. Unless you know how to advocate for yourself, or you go in with an advocate, whether it's an attorney or some victim advocate, to help the police along, it's very difficult to get police report made. And even after you get a police report made, to get someone to take action, to get a detective who's got a bunch of files, and now they put you on the bottom of the list because it doesn't seem all that bad compared to all the other stuff that they're dealing with, to get that attention, to then finally get to the prosecuting agency, to get them to take action because they got a whole bunch of other stuff that they feel, the physical stuff is a lot more important, and we put that on top of the list. I haven't seen, unfortunately, much response from law enforcement or prosecuting agencies in properly dealing with these type of crimes. They are crimes, and they do exist, and now we are getting more and more laws passed to try to protect the public. But the end result hasn't been where there has been a lot more responsiveness from law enforcement to dealing with it. Their typical response is, well, this isn't covered, which oftentimes is not true. Or sometimes they'll just say, well, that sounds like a civil matter, go and sue them, which again, may be true, but you still have a responsibility to take a report and try to see if the crime was committed, if you put it through to a prosecuting agency and make a decision on filing charges or not. And we don't see that happens as often as should.
Well, this other question that's on my mind is like, I know you can probably only speak to California, but I'm curious, is there like a general statute of limitations? Is there like an expiration date that people can go and file charges with respect to this?
For digital type of cases, intimate images being shared, yes. In California, there are statute of limitations. Thankfully, because of the knowledge and the research that exists, California has now removed the statute of limitations with regard to rape. So that no longer presents an obstacle as it used to, both criminally and civilly. It doesn't go back in time for all new cases filed after the laws have changed, which has only been a couple of years. So going forward, we don't have that obstacle, but for the digital ones, there is a statute of limitations, both criminally and civilly.
Okay, so can you paint a realistic picture? Let's say there's somebody out there who's listening to this, right? Who this has happened to. They haven't done anything yet. They're thinking about it. Can you paint a realistic picture of what that process is going to look like for a potential victim?
So obviously, you have two avenues to explore. One is the criminal avenue, one is the civil avenue. And I always tell people it's complex, both from a legal perspective with the statute of limitations issues and a lot of other issues of whether or not there's liability that attaches. I always invite people to just call our office and run the scenario by us, because both civilly, we can help you, obviously, with filing a civil lawsuit. But because of my experience as a former prosecutor, my detective's experience in law enforcement, we have a lot of background in knowing and how to deal with the law enforcement side of it as well. So we're able to give advice on how to deal with making a police report, where to make the police report, who to go to, what to say if you get some pushback and some resistance, and we kind of, help them along. Or if they make an effort, a reasonable effort, and they still can't seem to get any traction, we will send a victim advocate out in the front. So my advice would be to contact someone like, my office, or someone who also specializes in this area of practice that understands and knows both the civil and the criminal side of it, and run that scenario by them. They can guide you on what liability the person would have civilly, what potential liability they would have criminally, and how to go about making the various reports, and the pros and cons of each one. There's some pros and cons of criminal, there's some pros and cons of civil. A lot of times when people do make a criminal report, I always tell people to be a little cautious with regard to your timing, because having been a prosecutor, I still remember when I was prosecuting cases that I didn't really like when civil attorneys got involved while my case was still pending. And there's reason for that. If you charge a crime against an individual for sexual assault, and you have a civil attorney who also comes in and files a civil lawsuit, well, number one, your civil lawsuit will probably be stayed because that person has constitutional rights not to necessarily give any information that would incriminate themselves. So the civil case oftentimes is put on a stay while the criminal case is pending. So there's not much you can do on the civil side. But what makes it really bad for the prosecuting attorney, the criminal prosecuting attorney, is that the defense attorney for the defendant, for the perpetrator, will always ask the survivor, the victim, well, isn't it true, even before my client was arrested or after he was arrested, you went and hired a civil lawyer. You're after money, aren't you? You're going to lie, you're going to exaggerate because the end goal for you is to get some money out of them in a civil lawsuit. So they
Absolutely.
make the case about money
Money.
when it's really about justice and accountability. So I always tell clients, look, you can't pursue both, but if there's a criminal case pending and you have sufficient time with the statute of limitations, let that criminal case go. Let it run without any civil action. Because that way you take away that defense of, this is all about money from the criminal defense attorney.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll get the accountability and the justice that you need. And the nice thing about letting the criminal process run through is if you do get a conviction, whether through a plea or through a verdict of the jury, that potentially can be used in the civil case so you don't have to reprove those same identical facts again. That was already proven with the conviction. So the event, we know it happened. You don't have to reprove it. Now you just focus on proving damages in some case.
Okay.
So it makes it even easier. So that's an important thing to always keep in mind. If you are going to go through both, that sometimes timing becomes an important thing, and you don't necessarily want to have both running at the same time, as long as you have the time to wait on the suicide.
Okay. What would your advice be if the victim is alleging that the perpetrator is someone in power? So another attorney, such as yourself, a judge, law enforcement, a political figure. What would your advice be if, with respect to any sort of sexual crime that's alleged against a person in power?
I know with the public's perception is when you have people in power, such as a judge, an attorney, a doctor, and that they're more likely to get away with it. And that may be partially true if you think about it from the perspective of a jury trial. From the very beginning, the jurors are already, well, that's a doctor. They don't do that kind of stuff. That's a smart judge or an attorney. Why would they do, a kind of base kind of act? So there's already a bias in favor of those people simply because of their profession. So that does exist. And now in the news, you see Epstein getting away with all the stuff he got away with because of money and power. So there's this perception in the public that as long as they have money and some status or power, they're going to get away with it. And that's not necessarily true. Both as a prosecutor, I prosecuted many doctors very successfully. I prosecuted other professionals very successfully. As long as you can collect the evidence, you shouldn't be afraid of putting your credibility against a doctor, a lawyer, or a judge. The one nice thing is there are jurors out there, at least in my experience, I've tried well over 100 cases. So I'm quite experienced and seeing the reactions of jurors. There is some level of protection that they have. Jurors want to protect these people, especially if they're children, against these allegations of really horrible conduct. So you can win against a doctor. You can win against a lawyer. You can win against a judge. You just have to corral all the evidence, act very smart in how you go about getting that evidence. And obviously have a person behind you that knows how to do all of that stuff. And I'm not afraid of going against any professional. I have a case right now against George Foreman. I'm suing him right now. And of course, he has incredible status. He has passed away recently, but we filed a lawsuit while he was alive. And, we're not afraid of going against people with status, with celebrity, with money. They can be taken down as long as you have the truth on your side and you have the credibility. So I'm not afraid about going after that. I won't deny that there is a bias in their favor from the jurors' minds from the very beginning that we have to overcome, but it can be overcome.
Well, I'm also curious about that from a safety standpoint. When you're with someone who has means, of course, they have the means to maybe intimidate a little bit more. So even before we even get to all of that, people can certainly be coerced out of taking things further or scared or just threatened, intimidated, or what have you. I'm curious about how often you've seen that and how much of a likelihood there is for that.
Yeah, and you see that. I've seen that personally a lot of times. It's that ability to get to let people make the survivors or the victims feel like they will have no chance.
Yes.
Oftentimes what I see a lot of times is, survivors will come to me eventually and say, I just felt intimidated. They made me sign this document where I agree not to take action. A lot of these documents would not ever hold up in court. So what I tell people is still contact us. Let us review this, because a lot of this stuff is done under duress,
Yeah.
under coercion, and even some of the documents ourselves would never survive because they're against public policy. You
Okay.
can't ever get someone to agree that they can't go to the police and report them. That contract just is invalid in itself.
Okay.
But sometimes rich people think that, they can get a piece of paper, and if, as long as the survivor signs it, they feel like, oh, I agreed to it, so now I got no other option. So I tell people, call us, let us review this stuff. Even if you sign something away that that you think ends your case, let me take a look at it, because oftentimes I can fight that document. That document may not have any legal force. Or we can get around the document because it was done under duress or coercion.
Okay.
So yes, that happens. We've seen it happen. And, oftentimes nowadays what you see is some of these, especially celebrities, they make you sign something before you enter the house, and then, sexual assault occurs. And you have a document here saying
yes.
all sorts of stuff that I can't do this, I can't do that, I agree to this, I agree to that, before anything has even happened. They're getting you to agree that you're doing everything voluntarily
Yes.
before even any conduct has occurred, which itself makes no sense. But yeah, you see that it's a form of intimidation, it's a form of coercion, and we do see that in fiction.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you saw the recent controversy on social media last week. I did a post on it, but there was a girl who went on a date with a guy, and he left her a voice memo saying that, if we proceed forward, you need to know that I expect sex. And so he's attempting to get consent before they even go out again. And so my thoughts were that was coercion, that he's agreeing, he's making a statement. So legally there's protection there, or attempts to be protected there legally, but he's saying it out there to get her consent beforehand, so that if anything does happen while they're there, he could say, oh, she entered into that agreement with me.
Yeah. And people need to be aware that in California, even if you've given consent and a sex act begins, at any point in time, you are allowed to withdraw that consent.
Yeah,
and if the
absolutely.
man or whoever the perpetrator is fails to honor that, they are committing a crime, irrespective of the fact that you gave consent to begin the sexual act. So yes, that I agree with you. That is a form of attempted defense. And you got to wonder the type of person that would do that. What is that they're really afraid of? What have they done in the past that
Bingo.
was right on the gray line that they now need to protect themselves from this kind of stuff?
Bingo.
So, but be aware that even if you have not given consent, that doesn't mean you don't have the right to withdraw. Just because you said yes in the beginning doesn't mean you have to go through everything that person wants to do.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. And I'm just curious again, because we're in modern times where everything is technology based. What are your thoughts on the apps, on the dating apps, and the part that they may play in sexual aggression, sexual coercion? Do you have some thoughts on that?
I mean, it depends on the dating apps that you're talking about. I've had cases where, there's a website out there called Sugar Daddies where women will agree to go out with men in exchange for money. And some of these women go out truly believing that they don't have to engage in sex acts, but they just have to be a date and whatnot. But it turns into that, because the man clearly has a different set of expectations that if I paid you, then you're mine and I could do whatever I want with you.
Yes.
And there's a lot of hesitation from women who will post themselves up on sugar daddies because they don't feel like the public would ever believe that they didn't really realize that there was sex expected. But I've even prosecuted those cases successfully, where we had significant evidence where clear consent was withdrawn, and yet a sexual act occurred after that. So even though these sites sometimes will make it very difficult, especially if you post on it and it seem like you're giving consent to all sorts of sexual stuff, there are ways around it, and depending on the facts that exist, you may be able to do something. On your normal dating sites, obviously the difficulty is really knowing who that person is. They're obviously people are going to put their best foot forward, and it's very difficult to kind of gauge and see, who they really are. There used to be a website. Unfortunately, they couldn't get funding to keep going, where women would be able to report if they had a very bad criminal
Yeah.
acts occurring to them by people on these various date sites. So other women could actually be aware of
Yes.
the dangers, because that's something that doesn't exist. That website, unfortunately, no longer continue because they couldn't get the funding. It was a website where you could secretly put in the information. Anybody who typed in something similar, it would match them up and let them know you're not alone. This somebody else. So they would feel like they're not alone, because that's one of the hardest things that people have is they feel like, well, if I come forward, no one's going to believe me. But in my experience, having done this for over 25 years, when a sexual assault occurs, that perpetrator probably has several other sexual assaults in that history.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Women
I 1000%.
forward
Hmm.
and all the women come forward, you have corroboration by sheer numbers. One of the
Mm.
things I tell people is when you have prosecuted cases, when you have more than one victim, particularly victims who don't know
Yep.
each other. I've never
Bingo.
lost a case with more than one victim, because it's easy for a defense attorney to say, well, she's lying because of X. But then what about this other person who doesn't know this victim, saying the
Yeah.
same exact story? What's she lying about? What story can you come up with as a defense attorney for her? What if there's a third one? At some point, you lose credibility in making up these excuses for this one perpetrator.
Absolutely.
So it's so important for people, although they feel like they're the only ones who suffered this sexual assault by this individual, more likely than not, there's a trail of other people out there. So if you come forward and other people see you coming forward, it helps others also come forward saying, yes, it happened to me as well. Which is why we see that happen over and over again. When one woman finally stands up, you see a collection of other people come forward.
Yes, you
That
do.
happened that happened with the, U.S. Olympics case. There were so many girls that it took one person to finally stand up and go out in public and say, this happened to me by this guy. And then finally it empowered the rest of them to come forward. And now you see
Mhm.
that this was a horrible situation just repeating itself over and over and over again.
Well, and that's kind of why I was asking about the dating apps. And sort of them being silently complicit where, women have filed complaints on a man that's on an app, but he's allowed to continue to
Right.
stay on the app or come back on the app, and have access to other unsuspecting people, such as I think the cardiologist in Denver was like the major case where that guy, they allowed him to kind of come back on, and he over 3 years, so I was just curious on your thoughts about that.
There, under that kind of scenario, we see this also with rideshare a lot of times,
Oh,
rideshare apps with
yes. Oh,
Uber and Lyft.
yes.
And that absolutely creates liability for that
Mhm.
entity. If you are aware and you have the ability to prevent sexual assault and you didn't take all the appropriate steps and measures, you clearly would have liability. So if you are a dating website and you're getting complaints from women about the person being overly aggressive,
Yes.
being inappropriate, and you allow them to continue to have access to it, which is what your website is all about,
Hmm.
you are creating liability, and you absolutely can go after that platform, which is what the argument oftentimes is when we, use that same argument against Uber or Lyft, where they allow, after getting complaints about their drivers, they allow that driver to stay on the website. And it happens again and happens
Happens
again.
again.
And so finally someone takes some stand, files a lawsuit, and all of a sudden we take that person off of their platform.
Oh my goodness. There's just so many things to think about. Are there certain, I don't know, like for the lay person, or as a former prosecutor, as a person who's been doing this type of law for a certain amount of time, are there certain like risky things or situations that you would, recommend that people stay away from, that you've seen happen more often than not, just like general like scenarios?
So I'm hesitant to say yes to any of that because I don't want anybody who's gone through that to feel like they did anything wrong and blame
Absolutely.
themselves.
Absolutely. I think,
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
number one. And I
yeah,
want to make sure any survivor out there who's listening,
absolutely.
someone committed a crime against you, they are the ones responsible.
Bingo.
You didn't do anything to allow another person to commit a crime against you.
Correct.
But having said that, people should also be aware that stranger sexual assault is much more rare than what we see out there, which is, you may take all the precautions you can about staying away from people you don't know, but I don't remember the last study as far as what the percentage is. It's a very high number. Most of the sexual assaults occur by people you know. So you can try to take all the appropriate measures you can to
Absolutely.
avoid strangers and putting yourself in situations where you might increase the risk. But since most of the sexual assaults occur by people within families, to friends, whether it's your church, whether it's your doctor,
Yep.
but someone that you trust. And that's what the whole grooming process is. These sexual survivors are incredibly gifted from that perspective. They make you
Mm,
feel like you can trust them, and they're good at
absolutely.
that. And that's where the grooming comes in. And then you fall for that. You believe they're trustworthy. You let your guard down, and when sexual assault occurs, and there's almost
Boom.
nothing you can do under that scenario because they're gifted in that facility, make you feel good, make you feel special, make you feel protected, make you feel that you can trust them. And oftentimes they are in a position of trust, whether it's a police officer. We have cases against a police officer, oftentimes. And so you just never really know how. I can't think of a scenario where I can say, well, avoid doing this, avoid doing that, because majority of the time you could do all of that stuff, but it's still someone that you trust that's likely is going to violate your trust.
So many things to think about, and thank you so much for sharing that. If you have somebody, and I imagine we'll have a whole lot of somebodies that are listening that are in that situation that you described, where it is a family member or a trusted individual, and maybe let's say, maybe they see this person every day. So maybe it's not a situation where they can easily get out of it, not see them, not have to deal with them. What would be your recommendation for something like that?
Call people like myself or anybody that does this kind of work because you have attorney-client privilege. And on the civil side, the one nice thing about the civil side, which is a criminal, you're in charge of that case.
Yeah.
You can consult with an attorney and find out what your options are. Are
Good.
there ways of getting out of it? Or what are the steps you can take to
Yes.
protect yourself? And if you choose, after hearing the advice, that you still don't want to take that risk, it's your choice. You
Yes.
can walk away and do nothing. On the
Yeah.
criminal side, people need to understand this. People think that if they make a crime report, especially with sexual assault, they make the final decision of whether it goes forward or not.
I like that.
With crimes, that the decision belongs to the state. So it's the prosecuting agency. When I was a prosecutor, I get to make that decision. If you think about it from a domestic violence perspective, if we allowed the women to always say, no, I don't want to prosecute my domestic
Okay.
abuser, we would never get real prosecution of any domestic abuser. So oftentimes the prosecutor will choose to go forward even if the victim decides they don't want to prosecute that
Yeah.
individual. Now there is, especially in LA County where I used to work, there is an exception for survivors of sexual abuse. We really will consider strongly their desire to move forward with prosecution before we make a decision whether they're found charges or not. So the survivor of sexual abuse does have a lot more control on the criminal side. But generally speaking, with regard to crime, that decision belongs to the state. But when it's a civil case and you go consult with an attorney for a civil filing, it is your case. All the decisions belong to you. So for someone like that who feels stuck, who's unsure what to do, consult with a lawyer. Everything is kept confidential. Whether you take action or don't take action, that decision belongs to you. At least you can get some information to kind of guide you in making that
Yeah.
decision. But there is a way of doing this, and protecting yourself. So I would advise people just reach out to people who do this kind of work, reach out to my office, and we'll happily talk to you, guide you, give you the advice that you need, and you get to make the decision of what you're doing next.
I love that. I love that. And I'll definitely make sure to include your contact information. You brought up ride shares. So, like ride shares and, delivery services, food deliveries and things like that. I'm curious on what your thoughts are. If it's not necessarily the person who's driving, but maybe the person that you're delivering to or the person that gets in your car that's like exposing themselves or being sexually inappropriate.
You see that so often. And if you look
Yes.
at the statistics, it's happening every several minutes with these
Yes.
rideshare programs. And by rideshare, I'm also including these delivery services because,
Yes.
with Uber Eats and
Yes.
DoorDashers and
Yes.
whatnot,
Yes.
they have these people that are not, they're strangers that are coming
Absolutely.
to your home. They're sometimes having access to you. And you're putting yourself in a stranger's car. At the end of the day, we've come to a point where, before rideshare existed, we would always get taught you never get into a stranger's car.
Bingo.
And now we do it on a daily basis without even thinking about it. And if you
Yes.
think about that, how did that happen?
Yep.
It was the ability of these rideshare companies to convince all of us that this is safe, that this is okay. Why else are we getting into a complete stranger's car that we've never met?
Yep.
Because we are now conditioned to believe this is normal,
Yep.
this is okay, but most importantly, that this is safe. But when
Absolutely.
you look at the statistics, it's not. The sexual assaults, the exposures, the inappropriate touchings and comments, they happen on a daily, on an hourly basis
Mm-hmm.
from these companies.
Yep.
So people need to be aware of that. You're certainly not alone if you experience that because so many other people have experienced that. Please come forward. Please make that report. Make sure you let the platform know because like we talked about before, once they know that there's a problem with this individual, they are required to take action and they create liability for themselves when they don't take action. So it does take that complaint to make sure that that perpetrator is now removed from the platform. Sadly, they jump from platform to platform to
Yes.
platform. And that's also a big problem that hasn't been yet addressed. But at least, you got to take some form of action, reach out to someone, file your complaints, take some action because I guarantee you're not alone. That person is doing
Absolutely.
that to one person, they've already done it to 10 others, probably.
Okay. And one last question. I know there's so much to talk about. This is, I can go on all day about this, but I'm sure I don't know if you've heard of the bug chaser and the bug giver phenomenon, which is basically where people are knowingly giving people sexually transmitted diseases, or they're going after people with sexually transmitted infections. For anybody who's out there who's listening and, has been given an STI by someone who withheld that information from them, knowingly withheld that information from them. Can you speak about the legal options there?
Sure. And I have a case currently pending with those facts civilly. And I got to start off by reminding people we talked about earlier. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
most of the time, it's very difficult to go after someone civilly because of the money factor. It costs so much to prosecute them civilly, which is why, thankfully, there is also a criminal aspect to this. If a person knowingly withholds that information and gives you this disease, there is a very legitimate and viable argument for an assault that occurred. So you can make a police report. You can seek to have that person criminally prosecuted. Obviously, the evidence has to be that they knew about it,
yep,
that they had this history, they were informed of this disease by some professional, obviously, and yet they kept going about and spreading it, never telling anybody. Oftentimes, the facts that we hear is not only they don't tell their partner, but they lie when they say, no, I've been tested, I'm clean. And they give you the exact opposite information versus what they really truly have. So yes, there's criminal liability, there's civil liability. Civil liability is very difficult, unfortunately, to pursue unless the person happens to have significant.
yeah. Got it. Well, thank you so much. This has been so educational, so informing. informative. Sam, can you tell the audience how to reach you if they want to connect with you? If there's anything that we can support you with, like that you're working on?
We're just busy helping survivors throughout the platform, whether it's the physical assaults, the digital assaults. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us through our website. It's D as in David and the word law group, dlawgroup.com. You can check out all the resources that we have on that website.
Uh,
You can call us. Our local numbers 818-788-4919. I think it's 1-888. I'm not sure if it's 800 or 888, but I think it's 888 go see Sam. And we have a toll
I
free
love
number
it.
as well. So check out all of these, particularly our website where we try to put a lot of information in there. We have a lot of
Mhm.
blogs on these kind of issues and content. You can
Mhm.
read about it and then reach out to us at any time. We'd be happy to.
Absolutely. And we would love to have you back on to talk about the child on child sexual assault if you're
Yes,
open, because I think
absolutely.
that's something that we definitely need to tap into. And okay, well, great. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.